Today we're going to talk about Thomas Jefferson, specifically about the Declaration of Independence, and then his accomplishments as the third president of the United States. And then hopefully we'll spend more time talking about Abraham Lincoln, the greatest president, and hopefully we'll get to the end before the end of this class. So start with Thomas Jefferson, 1743 to 1826. Um, we go back to 1776 at the beginning of the War of Independence. We go back to the Continental Congress of 1776 because this is where they met and hashed out what they call the Declaration of Independence. This is late 17. So the thing that we talked about with George Washington, like he resigned, right? Being a general, he wanted to just enjoy the rest of his life with Martha, his lovely wife. But then they called him back to the convention. That was the convention for the Constitution of the United States, right? This is way before that. This is the Declaration of Independence. The two are separate events. So please do not get those two things confused. The thing that we talked about last Tuesday, that was for the Constitution. This is the Declaration of Independence. This is a much more immediate sort of an emergency situation. So late 1775, even as um, late 1775, Americans were still debating the merits of independence. Many Americans were not sure, even as late 1775. Notice, just the following year, they declare independence, right? So this is things were happening very quickly in the United States. So until that time, late 1775, many Americans were not sure. Should we separate ourselves from England? I mean, we are British, all of us, right? We are all British. Why should we separate from our motherland or homeland? Many believed in negotiated peace. There were problems, but let us negotiate, right? Instead of separating. And then this happened. This guy named Thomas Paine, he was a nobody. Basically, he wasn't anyone famous. He was basically this nobody who recently immigrated to the United States. So he was a British writer. He came to the United States, I think maybe 4 or 5 years, 3, 4 years before this. So he's a recent immigrant. And then he wrote this thing called Common Sense by Thomas Paine. Came out in January of 1776. So this is the beginning of 1776. And the book basically said that based on certain universal principles, independence from England was necessary. That's what the book said. It was sort of a polemic writing, right? It's very political. And it convinced many Americans, including the founding fathers, of the common sense view that he was writing about. And that shifted the entire mood of the nation toward independence. This is one of those things that happened. I guess today, in today's terms, this would be considered a runaway bestseller. Became like a viral sensation. Everybody read it, and everybody understood and agreed with what he was saying. So apparently, the book sold out, and there was like another edition, and then another edition. It just kept selling out because everyone started buying and reading his book, The Common Sense, a viral sensation at the beginning of 1776. Common Sense addressed to the inhabitants of America on the following subjects. And then he talks about written by an Englishman, right? He's giving them his distinctly Englishman's point of view. Well, they were all Englishmen at the time. So, uh, had a big influence. And then the colonies voted to sever their ties with England, and attendants decided to produce a formal declaration to explain the break. This is the Continental Congress, right? The attendants of that Congress decided to produce a formal declaration to explain why they were breaking away from England. Basically, the reason for the divorce. They were getting a divorce with England. And this was going to be the reason. And to explain the reasons, they asked Thomas Jefferson to write the document. He was only 33 years old, so he was one of the younger attendees, and they asked him to write it. So the job fell on Jefferson to write the Declaration of Independence. Um, and he did a marvelous job. He rose up to the challenge and he wrote this document. This is considered one of the sacred documents, perhaps the most sacred document for the United States, the Declaration of Independence of the United States of America by Thomas Jefferson, I suppose. I mean, everybody had a hand in it, I guess, but they gave the job of writing the draft, the first draft to Jefferson. And then I think some of the others, like the elder statesmen, like I actually don't know the names right now. Maybe like Benjamin Franklin. He was like the elderly statesman, and John Adams, some people like that. They had a hand in maybe editing some parts of it, but it was really the work of Thomas Jefferson that produced the Declaration of Independence. Apparently, I found this on the internet. Apparently, this was what he actually wrote. This was his first draft, or part of his first draft, his own writing. This is considered sacred for to the Americans. What is the Declaration of Independence? So I want to talk about this. Jefferson starts with a declaration of the country's founding principles based on national freedom and self-determination. So that's how it begins. Its fundamental values are the right to be free and to form a free nation. And Jefferson appeals to the laws of nature and God. So in the Declaration of Independence, we see nature and nature's God. God appears in the Declaration of Independence. One of the reasons why people say the United States is a Christian nation. It was founded upon Christian principles. He appeals to the laws of nature and God, who is God of nature. Very famous beginning. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal and they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Apparently, the original phrase by John Locke was Jefferson was like referencing John Locke here. It was life, liberty, and the pursuit of private property. Apparently, that's what John Locke wrote. And they couldn't have something like private property in the Declaration of Independence. So they changed, Jefferson changed it to pursuit of happiness. And this is a very, very famous phrase. Everybody knows this phrase, right? It is our unalienable rights. We have the right as human beings to pursue life, liberty, and happiness. And also, this is self-evident, all men are created equal. And the fact that we're created equal, that is because God created us this way, right? Now, if you say, okay, you guys are using the word men there, what about women? I'm sure they would have said, sure, women too. And they'll say, oh, yeah, men mean, the word means men and women, right? Yes, yes. But it's all men. Back then, it was all very sexist, all men. But today, we interpret men, obviously, to mean human beings. All human beings are created equal. Liberty and the pursuit of happiness. The way we interpret this very famous phrase, liberty and the pursuit of happiness, means what this means is I can do whatever I want to do. I can live my life any way I want as long as other people are not harmed. I'm just going to push away the mic a little bit here. There's an echo. And so Thomas Jefferson famously said, the government is best which governs least. That's the American character, right? This is in the Declaration of Independence. And Thomas Jefferson later on, just let us be free to live our lives any way we want. do not let the government interfere with our lives. That is my God-given right? I can live any way I want, as long as I don't harm anyone. This is the birth of, I guess, what we call libertarianism. The political movement of libertarianism is the government is best, which governs least. This is why some conservatives, they oppose liberalism or what we call socialism, because socialism they see as an encroachment of their rights, their unalienable rights to live as they want. You're interfering in my life too much. Yeah, these God-given rights are unalienable. They cannot be taken away. Government exists to guarantee these rights. The power of the government comes from people, not, I mean, everything comes from God, but God as in the way the Europeans were thinking of where the power comes from is power comes from God. And who are the God's representatives? The kings, right? Kings are God's representatives on earth. So the power of the government comes from the monarchy. So this is in direct contrast to that. No, the power of the government comes not from some king, not from some, even if it's constitutional monarchy, right? The power comes from the people. So we the people, it would say later on in the Constitution, we the people, right? We are the ones that give power to the government, to the state. And I think I mentioned this in class before, so I'm just going to mention it because I mentioned it. I want to like make sure that I wasn't uh, like confused in my thinking, so I double checked. So this is when the Constitutional Court was getting its sentence to President Yoon, impeachment proceedings, right? And the judge didn't actually say this in his verbal statement. The thing that I was mentioning was the written document that they released, like a hundred some page. The full document starts out by quoting the Korean Constitution. It starts by saying, the Republic of Korea shall be a democratic republic. The sovereignty of the Republic of Korea shall reside in the people, and all state authority shall emanate from the people, right? So I remembered that statement from the news because that reminded me of the Declaration of Independence, right? The power of the government comes from the people. So this is the founding principle of the United States. And many nations, I think, hold on to the same kind of ideal, the same principle. I mean, Korea's definitely is. And many modern nations today, their constitutions, I think, hold the same kind of philosophy, right? Principle that the power of the government must come from the people. So the declaration also was sending a message to the British government, right? We will no longer give consent. What the British government was doing was unacceptable. And so you cannot, was it basically, the complaint was you cannot tax us without representation, collecting taxes, but you don't give us any voice. So we will no longer give consent to be ruled by you. Whenever any form of government becomes disruptive, it is the right of the people to abolish it and institute a new government. So with the Declaration of Independence, the United States became the first nation of its kind founded only on a creed. So people say, the first nation of its kind that was founded on an idea, not on a race, not on some, monarchy, some ruling power, a people. It was the first of its kind that the nation was founded upon some ideal. So they said there were other European republics at this time, but they weren't founded upon an ideal. I mean, they had a race to begin with, right? Like the Swedes. They were the nation of Swedes, even if they had a republic or a democratic republic. It was already based on the people. In most countries, you became a citizen by birth or race. Most of it still is race, by race. It's called, shoot, how do you pronounce this? Jus sanguinis, I think is how you say, jus sanguinis. Jus sanguinis is Latin for the right of blood. And I think that law still applies to many nations today, many nations, including, I think, Korea. If not officially, if not by the government policy, culturally, certainly, I am a Korean because I have Korean blood in me. By citizenship, I'm Canadian. I had to like give up my Korean citizenship. But by blood, I'm Korean. And I fully expect other Koreans to see me as Korean. Because I think Korean culture is, of course, by blood. You could have a missionary's kid who was born and raised in Korea. Let's say a Canadian missionary family, right? They're in Korea. Uh, the missionary kid's born in Korea. First language is Korean. He goes to Korean schools. He grows up to be a Korean citizen, let's say, right? He's not treated like other Koreans because he looks Caucasian, right? You're not one of us. You do not have Korean blood. Whether it's fair or not, that's how many nations identify themselves, right? By birth or race. But in the United States, officially anyway, you become a citizen of the United States by reciting certain principles, right? You recite, yes, I will uphold the Constitution. You agree with its founding principles. That's what makes you an American. Supposedly. Here's a declaration in Congress, July 4th, and they're making much of the July 4th coming up this year because this year is the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States. Right? 1776, that was, I guess, exactly 250 years ago. Declaration by the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled. When in the course, I'm not going to read that. So this is that part. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men, with capital M, are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their power from the consent of the governed. Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter that government or to abolish it and to institute new government. Laying on its foundation on such principles, and then it goes on and on and on and on and on. But that is the Declaration of Independence. This guy, who is a British writer, is a very popular writer, a Christian writer apparently, Gilbert Chesterton. He said of America this, and then this became pretty famous, right? America is the only nation in the world that is founded on creed. That creed is set forth with dogmatic and even theological lucidity in the Declaration of Independence, perhaps the only piece of practical politics that is also theoretical politics and also great literature. The words are just magnificent, right? It's praising the Americans. These Americans, right? They're so weird and so new. It is a new thing in the world, right? The United States. So that is the Declaration of Independence. Um, the founding charter, right? And then later on, the Constitution. We'll come back to there's a tension between the Declaration of Independence of the United States and the Constitution of the United States. That tension becomes evident as decades go by, and so we'll come back to this part of. Well, actually, later on today, when we get to Lincoln talks about this, the tension between the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. Just briefly, Jefferson as president, he was a magnificent president, one of the greats, Thomas Jefferson. Not only did he write the Declaration of Independence, if that was the only thing he did to write the Declaration of Independence, right, that would have immortalized him. Just writing of that document. Because with that, he became one of the founding fathers of the United States. Many founding fathers, we say if you had to select just one, it would be George Washington, but he would be right up there, right, as one of the founding fathers because he wrote the Declaration of Independence. but he also became the third president. John Adams, sort of like his older politician, he became the second president after George Washington. And then after John Adams, he became president. Apparently, John Adams and Jefferson were bitter enemies. They became bitter political enemies. They fought a lot. He held to the conservative creed that government is best which governs least. He was an advocate for free market economy, so he was a conservative that way. This is the thing that just one thing that I want to mention among the many things that he did. He purchased Louisiana from France. There was a question whether he, as president, had constitutional authority to spend so much money buying such a piece of land from Napoleon. But he asserted himself. He said, I have the power. I shall make the deal. So he purchased Louisiana from Napoleon. Napoleon, the would-be emperor, well, he did become the would-be emperor of Europe. He had squandered his treasures on wars of conquest in Europe, and he was desperate to get more money, and he was bent on building an empire. And he sold Louisiana because he thought it was a worthless piece of land. And the story is, I don't want to dwell on this too much, but it's a big chapter in the story of the United States, right? At first, the American delegates that went to see Napoleon, they weren't interested in buying Louisiana at all. They were just interested in getting some permission, the rights to like use some parts of Louisiana because it was officially the French territory, right? And then Napoleon said, well, why don't you guys just, buy the whole damn thing, right? Just give me lots of money for it. And then they relayed that message to Jefferson, and he jumped on it, right? Yes, buy the land. At the time of the purchase, nobody knew how large Louisiana was. It's just this huge piece of land. They did not know how huge the place was. But Napoleon gave it away for $15 million. I guess he thought that was good money, right? $15 million. I asked ChatGPT, and it said apparently it's about like $400 million today. $400 million. Increase that by like twice, or $1 billion, right? Could you buy Louisiana? I'll show you the piece of land. Could you buy something like this today for $1 billion? So what we say is Napoleon was a fool, right? He was so focused on Europe, getting a little bit more piece of Europe, that he gave away a piece of land, the size of which was bigger than all of Europe at the time. So the man was just a fool to give the thing away. Giving away land larger than his entire empire, he only saw short-term gain in the sale. Louisiana was sold for $50 million. This is Louisiana. What was bought, it turned out to be bigger than the entire United States. So with this one purchase, $15 million, Thomas Jefferson increased the size of the country over twice. And then the famous thing about is it Clark and Gable, Clark and the project to discover how big the area was that took years to complete. Mapping out the land. But this is a big thing that happened in the United States. One of Jefferson's great achievements, right? He just pushed forward and purchased the land. And then later on, this kind of purchase, this I think was the biggest purchase of land in human history by far, right? The next biggest apparently was Russian American, Alaska. That was big, but nothing compared to Louisiana. So that was his accomplishment. He gained land larger than any empire in Europe, 2.1 million square kilometers. Korea is 100,000 kilometers, right? So this land was about 21 times the size of Korea right now. That huge piece of land, only for like $500 million. The last story of Jefferson and Adams, this is a sort of a touching end to Thomas Jefferson. Apparently they died on the same day. So they were bitter political enemies, but then once Jefferson retired, they became a kind of like friends again, the best of friends. They corresponded with each other, and they both died on the same day on July 4th. Not like mythology, apparently they actually died within hours of each other, as if they made some kind of agreement, right? And something about, I think John Adams, it was either John Adams dying first or Thomas Jefferson dying first. And one of them, when he was dying, said, at least, I think maybe it was Jefferson. No, Adams, when he was dying, he said something like, at least Jefferson is still alive or something. And then he died. Sort of a touching story. And that was the 50th Independence Day that these both founding fathers died. It's like if this was a narrative, if this was some kind of fictional story, right? This is a dramatic or quite touching and appropriate ending to two of the founding fathers. So now we get to Abraham Lincoln. Let me just check the time. I think I have lots of time. I think we could finish finish the story of Abraham Lincoln. So this is Lincoln Memorial, right? If you go to Washington, I've never been to. I've been to the United States twice, once to California, once to New York. I've never been to Washington, D.C., never wanted to. Why should I? God forsaken. Uh, but Lincoln Memorial is a place that I would want to visit because, I like Lincoln. He's my favorite president. In this temple, as in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever. In our hearts, Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever. Could you imagine if Mr. Donald Trump decided he would build a monument of him sitting next to Lincoln? Could you imagine two chairs there? No? It's just changing so much, right? So many things about Washington. Abraham Lincoln is almost universally considered the greatest American president. Um, they like take polls apparently almost all the time, all the scholars, all the historians, they rate him the greatest American president. It's largely because of the story of Abraham Lincoln. It's such a great story, right? If you watch the movie, just a part of slice of Abraham Lincoln's life, who's that guy who played Abraham Lincoln? I mean, it's a wonderful movie, but the entire story is just such a wonderful story. Um, here he is. Time. This is like 2022. This is 2022 October issue. It says how our greatest president saved democracy, and we can too. I guess this is Time magazine worrying about the United States politics becoming polarized. And they're saying basically this was nothing compared to what Abraham Lincoln had to do, right? If he saved democracy, then we can too. Of course, what the magazine doesn't mention is we don't have another Abraham Lincoln, right? We wish we could have had uh, Abraham Lincolns every so many years, but we never had any other Abraham Lincoln. The background for Abraham Lincoln, because this is the story of slavery and of the emancipation of all the slaves. So we have to start with slavery in the United States. I kind of mentioned this when we were talking about the long 19th century. One of the better things one of the better things that happened, positive things, I think I said, that happened in the long 19th century was the abolition of slavery, right? That was a big thing, a new thing that happened in the world. We finally decided slavery will not do any longer. So this was the situation in the United States. The slavery problem was that it was clearly immoral. Many people could see that it was immoral, but it wasn't so clear to the slave owners. If you were non-slave owning American, it was clear what these guys are doing is clearly immoral. We as Christians, it was a Christian nation after all, right? We should be treating them like our brothers. They are our fellow, human beings, creatures made in the image of God, right? How could we treat them as like animals, worse than animals? We treat slaves worse than animals. So this was clearly a problem. And I think I mentioned right from the beginning, this was a problem, right? With George Washington. He obviously felt very guilty about owning so many slaves that he wanted to free all of his slaves. But the problem of slavery just became worse and worse as decades went by. So it was a big problem in the United States. Slavery divided in the United States. The Southerners, who were mostly like farming societies, they needed slaves for their economy, right? So they claimed owning slaves was an individual's choice. We have a right to own private property. That's John Locke, right? We have an unalienable right to pursue, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But what that really means is pursuit of private property. Slaves legally are our property, right? You cannot tell us what to do with private property. Condemn us for being immoral, right? If you want. But the government cannot dictate what is moral and what is immoral. That is not the job of the government. Let the church ministers, right, condemn us if they will, right? This is a matter of personal morality. This is nothing to do with the government. Arguments for slavery, they had good arguments to make. Let us look at history. We've always had history. Throughout the history, there've always been slavery. Even the Bibles, in the Bible days, nobody ever said we must free all the slaves, right? Obey your masters, right? Slaves were supposed to be living in their lives as slaves. The important thing was to save your soul, right? Not to become freed of your slavery. Because true freedom is the freedom of, the salvation of your soul. Apostle, right? They would quote Apostle Paul urging slaves to serve their masters. They would even quote Aristotle. Didn't Aristotle, the great philosopher, say some people are meant to be slaves? He actually did say that, right? One of the more maybe foolish things that he could have said. Some people are slaves by convention. They don't deserve to be slaves, but they lost the battle. They lost the war. So they were sold as slaves, but they're just like us. But then there are others who are by nature slaves. They're meant to be slaves, right? They need masters. So even he said it, right? Some men are free, others are by nature slaves. And for them, apparently, for them at this time, it made a lot of sense for them to treat slaves as needing masters, right? They need our guidance because they're not as intelligent. And the U.S. Constitution itself declares slavery as the law of the land. It says runaway slaves must be returned to their owners. And that is true. See, this is the tension that was in the two sacred documents of the United States. The first founding document said all men are free. All men are created equal, right? By their creator God. All men are equal with unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Liberty, slaves are not free, right? And yet, by the time of the Constitution, that all these founding fathers ratified, right? They signed their names, including like George Washington, right? Constitution said if a slave runs away, that slave must be returned to its owner because it's a property, right? Of the master. So there's this tension. Well, they could point to the Constitution and say Constitution itself recognizes slavery, right? So legally, you can't do anything about this. Even our founding fathers, Washington, Thomas Jefferson, also they all had slaves. Thomas Jefferson, I don't know if you know the story, apparently had some kind of relationship with, some of his slaves, and he fathered some children by them as well. That was a controversial thing for a long time until they began to do DNA testing. And then they discovered some Black Americans are actually descendants of Thomas Jefferson. And that made the news for a while. This is a while ago. So the Constitution problem is that the Declaration of Independence said all men are created equal, but the U.S. Constitution accepted slavery. There's this tension. Southerners believed liberty meant they could choose to own slaves, right or not. No government can enforce morality. And I think that is, I mean, that you could say that is a legitimate argument, right? You don't want the government to start dictating morality. You want the government to, again, keep that thing separate, right? Morality should be maybe the realm of the religion, of culture, societal norms, but you don't want the government to start dictating what is morally right, morally wrong. I mean, what the government should do is to say what is legal and what is illegal, right? Whether something is criminal or something abides by the law. But this is a matter of morality. Slavery is legal. Right? You can't argue against the legality of owning slaves. They viewed owning slaves as part of the American way of life, part of natural law. This is before Darwinism, but it's part of the natural law. Even if it was considered immoral by some, they didn't think so. I mean, you could convince yourself it's actually better for them to have me as their master, right? You could easily convince yourself of that. I'm a good master. I take care of them. I provide their housing. I feed them, right? I let them have, their leisure time. I give them education, some of them, if they're smart enough, right? I let them marry, have their own families. What is there not to like about what I'm doing with my slaves? I'm just saying, it would have been easy for some of the slave owners to convince themselves that it was actually what they were doing was actually even morally right thing to do. Many Northerners also believed, on the other hand, that they should not force others, the Southern states, to be like them because our economies are different, right? The Northern states, we don't need slaves, but the Southerners, our fellow American, brethren, they need slaves for their economy, right? So we can't tell them not to pursue wealth. So let us not be intolerant of their views. Let us live and let live, right? It's not like they're hurting us. Let them live their lives. Let us live our own lives. So many in the northern United States weren't too serious about abolishing slavery. But many others still affected by the abolitionist movement that was happening around the world at this time, right? They believed slavery was immoral and a sin against both God and humanity. So their objection to slavery was, I think one of you said maybe one of the motivations why the northern states turned against the southern states against slavery was economic. And I maybe there were some economic factors in that situation, but I think mainly it was a sense of moral or being moral as opposed to being immoral, right? They believed it was a sin against God and humanity. So that was a situation where Abraham Lincoln entered politics, 1809 to 1865. He became a first-term congressman in 1846. That's Abraham Lincoln there. They called him Honest Abe, good old Abe or Honest Abe, because he had a reputation for being honest. He looks like an honest man, right? Tall, skinny, Abraham Lincoln. He was famously born in a log cabin. Log cabin, the thing that comes to mind when you say log cabin for the Americans is the pioneers. They didn't live in well-built houses in a good neighborhood. They lived out in nature, log cabin because that was the most primitive thing that they could build. He was a child of the frontier. He was self-taught. He taught himself law, and he worked as a lawyer. And then he began as congressman in 1846. All right, this is apparently the log cabin where Lincoln was born. It was the famous log cabin in which Abraham Lincoln was born, they say. This is way back in 1909. And this is a typical picture that people have of Abraham Lincoln when he was a young man. He was unusually tall and very, very skinny. right? And he had his axe with him because he was constantly chopping wood or something. And he was constantly reading books because he wanted to educate himself in the ways of, educated men. So one thing that I should include, this isn't part of the slides, so you don't have to learn this for the exam, but one of the stories that you learn about Abraham Lincoln was he wanted to go west. He's from Chicago, right? He's a native Chicagoan, from Chicago, but he wanted to go west, child of the frontier, and he was drawn to the romanticized idea of, people saying, "Go west, young men," right? If you want to make it in today's world, you need to go west. I think I talked about the idea of going west, ever going west. What's her name? Columbia. It's your destiny for the United States to keep going west until we reach the Atlantic Ocean, right? Let us cover the entire continent. Go west, young man. So he could have gone. Uh, it was touch and go kind of thing, right? And if he had gone west, American history would be very, very different today. But because he did not go but stayed, America is what the United States is now today. We may have not one United States, but we actually may have two or three different countries where the United States is right now. People talk about one man making a big difference, right? There are such men in history. Talked about some of them already, right? Talked about like Augustus Caesar, one man making a big difference. I guess maybe this Thursday we'll talk about another such man in a sort of a negative way, what one man could make the difference, great difference. And I think Abraham Lincoln was one such man. He made a big difference because he did not go west. So I just thought I would mention that. He wanted to go, but somehow he didn't. I don't know the details of why he didn't go. That's for, I guess, if you want to read his biography or something. So he spoke out against slavery right from the beginning. He was an abolitionist. He was anti-slavery. And I thought he was kicked out of office. And then I was reading this thing and it said, no, that's a misconception. Abraham did not lose a re-election. He did not run. I thought, why did he not run? Apparently, they had an agreement, the party that he was running with, to rotate politicians. So he agreed to do just one term, and then he went back to his profession of being a lawyer. So so he returned to being a private citizen. But then by 1857, so this is like 11 years later, when he first became a congressman, he was now a leader of a newly formed Republican Party. So he was one of the founding members of the Republican Party. And he became convinced by this time that the South was going to keep expanding slavery. Because I guess slavery is a thing that's kind of self-propagating. It can't just stay within its walls. In order for slavery economy to succeed, I guess it wanted to keep expanding, like a cancerous growth, right? It wanted to keep branching out into other states. And so Lincoln and the Republicans, they become convinced that the slave owners, the slave economy wanted to branch out into other states. And I think the politics of that time was let the slave owning states stay slave owning. We'll let them have their way, right? Let us live in peace, right? Let the non-slave owning states where slavery is not the norm, let them stay slave free. But the southern states wanted that to not be the case. They wanted that to change. So the Republicans became convinced that the South wanted to keep expanding slavery until maybe it took over the entire nation. So they wanted to fight against that. He ran for U.S. Senator on a platform of anti-slavery ideas and policies. And then he challenged a man by the name of Stephen Douglas, senator. He was an incumbent senator running against. He was a Democrat, right? He was a Democrat, and Abraham Lincoln was of the newly formed Republican Party. And in 1858, as they were um, asking for votes, they had a series of debates on slavery. And this came to be known as Lincoln-Douglas debates. And this became really, really famous, apparently. It made like headline news. Every time they had debates, they would transcribe their debates, speeches, and they would publish them. And so this thing made Abraham Lincoln really famous. He lost the race to Douglas. But apparently this is the thing that made Abraham Lincoln a national figure and made him sort of the spokesperson for the abolitionist movement in the United States, anti-slavery movement in the United States. So he lost the election, but he gained national recognition for himself and the party. It's one of the things that this is an excerpt, one of the things they talked about. I just thought I would let you have this text, just some short excerpt of the kind of things they said. Lincoln said, if we would not want to be enslaved, then we should not enslave others. You would say something like, this is as clear to me as, day and night. He's talking about the golden rule, right? If we would not want to be enslaved, then we should not enslave others. Douglas, the golden rule does not apply to slavery because they are not considered to be equal to the white people. Slavery is a matter of property rights. Is making speeches. The government should not interfere with those rights. You are assuming that there is no difference between the right to enslave a man and the right to enslave an ox. The difference is that man is made in the image of God and has an immortal soul. The ox says neither. I'm sorry. The ox says neither. Hence, there is a radical and essential difference between the two, and this difference must be made the basis of our argument whenever we discuss the morality and the constitutionality of slavery. Applause, applause. But this is the kind of thing they did. And it wasn't just a short sound bites, right? These guys debated for hours, apparently. Their debates went on for like 2, 3, 4 hours. And the crowd, they listened to every word that they were saying. People were like that back then, right? Once you started talking, you could talk for like an hour, making a speech for an hour. I guess people were maybe a bit more intelligent back then. Here's a picture of Lincoln-Douglas debate. Again, I thought this was a photograph, but apparently it's not a photograph. There was a painting done, and this is a photograph, black and white photograph of the painting that was made of the Lincoln-Douglas debate. So this is the thing that made him nationally famous. I'm skipping the stories here, right? So Lincoln became president in 1861. So this is like 4 years later, I guess, 1857, decided to run for senator. And then in 1860, I guess he ran for president. He became president in 1861. By this time, the United States politics had become poisonous. Politics had become very, very violent and poisonous. And when the election results were made public, that Lincoln had become president, as soon as he was elected president, South Carolina, one of the southern states, seceded. Seceded means they left the Union. They said, if Lincoln becomes president, we're not going to be part of the United States because we know the kind of person he is, that he cannot live together in harmony with slave-owning states. So we are going to break away from the United States. And more threatened to leave. So he had two conflicting goals. Even before he became president, there were states already leaving the Union. So he wanted to abolish slavery on the one hand, but the nation was breaking apart, pulling apart. It was breaking up. So he had to save the Union. The two things were almost an impossible task. In the beginning, I think Abraham Lincoln gave priority to saving the Union. He tried to compromise as much as he could. I'm not going to take away your right to own slaves. Let us just live in peace, right? Do not break away from the Union. That is one thing I cannot allow you to do as the president of the United States of America. He said he would not interfere with slavery, but the nation must not separate. But the South said no. As long as you are president, we're divorcing you, right? 7 states seceded, not succeed, seceded. They broke away from the United States, and they formed what they called the Confederate States of America, and they made this man by the name of Jefferson Davis their first president. So I got you a map. So if you look at the map, this is Jefferson Davis, the first and I guess the only president of the Confederate States of the United States, the Confederation. If you look at this, there were 7 states, and then soon more states joined them. So in the end, the Confederate States became like, I think it was 11 states. I'm not going to count them. I think there were like 11 states in for the Confederation. So the United States, right from the beginning of Lincoln's presidency, became, we say, ununited. The United States was no more. It broke apart right from the beginning. It became ununited, divided into the Union states and the Confederate States. Nobody wanted war. Nobody wanted war. So a lot of people say, okay, just let them go, right? Let them go. They have their ways, we have our ways. Let's just go our separate ways. A lot of people wanted that. Because why fight? Why, if your wife wants a divorce, right? You're not going to beat up your wife. You can't do that, right? So I think it made sense to a lot of people. If they don't want to be part of our nation, our great nation, just let them go. Let them have their own country. So nobody wanted war. And yet, they say, and yet came the Civil War. And the Civil War turned out to be the bloodiest war in American history. So how did this war happen? Well, for one thing, Lincoln wanted to fight, right? Lincoln said, there is no way that I will let these states go. I will not let this happen. This is sheer willpower, right? He would not let this happen. They say in the beginning, when the Confederate States seceded, about 70% in the North resigned to letting the South separate without war. 70%, majority of the northern states wanted to just let them go. Why fight? When somebody doesn't want to live with you, why fight, right? But then they said, this is how the events unfolded. The Confederate Army attacked Fort Sumter in April of 1861, and that is the beginning of the Civil War, April 1861. They attacked this fort. I guess this is an army base, some kind of like fort, like a castle kind of thing, right? There's an interesting story as to why they attacked the fort. Some scholars say Lincoln lured them in because he wanted to start the war. So it was like a bait. He laid a trap. I don't know the full details. I'm not a scholar of the Civil War. Maybe somebody will say, oh, Peter Lee had it all wrong. But what little I know is Lincoln did not want the Confederate States to go their way. He wanted to fight. He wanted to keep the Union. That was his primary goal. So I guess he was delighted. I mean, sad that so many soldiers died, but he was delighted that the Confederate attacked Fort Sumter because now everyone was galvanized and everyone wanted to fight. The North galvanized. Lincoln called up 75,000 volunteers and invaded Virginia, thus starting the war proper. The war dragged on longer and bloodier than anyone could have imagined. Battles went back and forth. The Union forces initially suffered many defeats. They were actually losing at the beginning, but they won just enough battles to keep going until this man named General Ulysses Grant became Lincoln's general, and he turned the tide, they say, turned the tide of... So General Grant is actually, they say, the real hero. I guess he was sort of like General Eason Shin kind of thing, right? He was the real hero who turned things around. I think I got some pictures here. Just some pictures. It was a vicious war between the blue and the, was it white? The South. The Northern, the Union was, they were blue. Battle after battle after battle, many people died. This is an interesting story of Lincoln's generals. Lincoln apparently had 7 generals, one after the other. And all of his generals disappointed Lincoln. Lincoln thought we should be winning, but these generals kept losing. And Lincoln kept finding faults with these generals. A general maybe would not attack when he should. A general would win a battle and then he should pursue the enemies, but he was maybe too much of a gentleman, right? Oh, gentlemen, we don't pursue enemies, when they're running away. That is not gentlemanly, right? Um, it's not the gentlemanly way of conducting war, kind of thing, right? And some of the generals may have been Southern states sympathizers. Even though they were serving under Lincoln, they may have sympathized, like the personal like ideology actually sympathized with the Southerners. What is wrong with owning slaves, right? So he went through apparently 6 generals until he came to Ulysses Grant. Ulysses Grant was the seventh general who did everything that Abraham Lincoln thought a general should do to win the war. He was apparently very efficient, very brutal in his conduct of the war. He did not hesitate to kill fellow Americans because he wanted to win the war. General Ulysses. He would actually become president later on, but that's okay. So that's next week. So on January 1st, 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. This is a big, okay, again, one of the sacred documents in the United States, where he decreed that all slaves in the slave-owning southern states shall be free by decree. As President of the United States, I have the power, and I authorize this Emancipation Proclamation. The story behind the Emancipation Decree, so this was the January 1st, right? The first day of 1863 is that his advisors asked him not to do it. They said, this is a foolish thing, right? You do not want to provoke the southern states any further, right? The war has been at this time going on for, I guess about 2 years, we want there to be some kind of settlement, cessation to the fighting. You will only be provoking them to fight harder and longer if you undercut them like this, right? By saying all their slaves are free. I suppose there were many reasons why Lincoln did this. One reason they say, well, one reason could have been he wanted maybe some of the slaves to revolt, right, and join the Northern Army. But one reason they say was that he wanted the North to gain the moral high ground, they said, the moral high ground. And this turned the war in its more in a purely moral terms. So Lincoln could make the argument, this isn't about anything else. This isn't about economics. This isn't about like different cultures, different ways of life. This is about what is morally the right thing to do and what is morally the wrong thing to do, right? He wanted to paint the war situation in stark moral terms. And part of the reason why he did that was some of the European countries were sympathizing with the southern states, apparently. Even though they were abolitionists, right? They were sympathizing with the southern states instead of the North. And Lincoln wanted to make sure with this decree, making this such a clear moral thing that the European nations like Britain or France couldn't support the southern states. Apparently, that's one of the stories. Emancipation Proclamation. So this is a big thing that happened to the slaves, right? To the slaves. This is where Mr. Lincoln freed us, they would say, right? This is the day of our emancipation. So this is, let me just check the time. Oh, shoot. Some other eventful things that happened in 1863. In July, there was a big battle called the Battle of Gettysburg. It was a very famous battle. A lot of people died. A very hard-fought battle. But this was one of those turning turning points where the North won a big war, and this turned the tide in favor of the North. And then several months later, same year, Lincoln came back to Gettysburg to memorialize the place, the battlefield, to memorialize the soldiers who had died. And this is where Lincoln made his really, really famous speech. Very short. Apparently, he spoke for only a few minutes. Uh, but everybody remembered what he said, apparently. This is the famous Gettysburg Address, where he talks about, we dare not, but and yet, I don't know the words. Four scores and 8 years ago or something, our forefathers founded this land. And then he ends by saying, that the government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth or something, from this planet. So that happened in 1863. April 9th, 1865, General Robert Lee, the man in charge of the Confederation, surrendered to General Grant, and that was the end of the Civil War. I think I will actually not get into the second inaugural address. I'll just kind of talk about it a little bit. I'll talk about it a little bit, and then we'll run out of time. So I'm going to have to finish this 2 more slides Thursday. Oh no, I don't want to talk about this Thursday. So I will continue with this next Tuesday. Part 3, the last part of the story of the United States. The story will continue. But because we still have 5 minutes, I could go through a couple of bullet points here. I want to talk about the second inaugural address because this was the last, I guess, sort of significant thing that Lincoln did, right? Second inaugural address, March 4th of 1865. We said the war ended on April 9th, 1865. Does that mean I'm going to ask you about these dates? I have to work on that. Sorry, the list of dates that I have to give you guys this. I don't know, maybe by next week or something. So it ended on April 9th. He won the second election, second time around. Oh, I should talk about that actually. So he won his second term, and the second inaugural address happened in March 4th, 1865. Lincoln had to do some things, some political maneuvering in order to get elected a second time because the public the public is fickle, right? The electorate is fickle. He had guided the United States for 4 years, right from the beginning. He was a wartime president, right? And many Americans were sick of war. And he could have lost his second election. And one of the things he did apparently was made all the soldiers vote. So he would make sure the soldiers could take leave of, from the front lines so they could go back and vote for him. And of course, the soldiers would be favorable to voting for Lincoln. And the other thing he did was he intentionally selected as his running mate a man by the name of, Adam Johnson, Johnson, what's his name? Andrew Johnson, sorry, Andrew Johnson. He intentionally selected a Southern Democrat gentleman. So Lincoln is Republican, right? The Southern states, the Confederates, they were Democrats. He intentionally chose this man, Andrew Johnson, to be his running mate because he wanted to tell people, I'm a unifier, right? I'm a unifier. I want our country to stay united. And so here is my vice president, my right arm man. Look at him. He's a Southern Democrat. And yet he was a unionist, even though he was, in fact, a white supremacist. He had very, very racially biased views. He said yes to serving under Lincoln. So he became Lincoln's vice president. And this is the way he won his second term. So his second inaugural address that he made on March 4th, this is known as one of the greatest political speeches. So they say. If you just read Lincoln's speech, it's kind of hard to appreciate why is this considered such a great speech. because his speech is colored in what's called religious language of his day. He spoke like a preacher kind of thing, right? It's a very religiously colored speech, very short. And so scholars they pick apart his speech, like sometimes word by word, and they say this was an incredibly important speech that Lincoln made. So it's one of the treasures of American history, the second inaugural address by Lincoln. And that is what we'll cover next Tuesday. So Lincoln knew the war was about to end. It killed 623,026 men. How did they know to count even to the last digit, 26 men? Devastated the nation. This is another background to the speech. His son, his favorite son, apparently he had four sons, all sons. His wife gave him four sons, and only one of them made it to adulthood. Three of his sons died. One son died at infancy. So that wasn't such, I guess, I mean, it's all tragic. But his favorite son, I guess his name was William or Willie, his son died in 1862 of some fever. And apparently it shocked Lincoln and his wife. It was like personally, it was a big tragedy for him. And they say Lincoln never fully recovered from the death of his son, Willie. He loved him so much. And apparently he felt this was a kind of punishment given by God, a punishment given by God to the nation, that is the Civil War. But he saw himself being punished by God personally in the loss of his own son, right? So that gets kind of reflected in the inaugural address, his second inaugural address. And that is what we'll cover next Tuesday. Thank you for being here today. Instead of being out there, I'll see you all Thursday.